Well, it's really great to be here. I'm, as Thomas said, thank you very much. I'm based in Nashville, and before that I was at Austin Peay State University, which is not based in Texas, as the name might suggest. Is in fact a state school in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is a little bit north of Nashville. And so some of the work that I'm going to talk about today is based really on that system perspective, and some of it is things that are really kind of in the hopper that we're working on, and some of it is work that has happened at Austin Peay and has been moved to other institutions across the state, other universities and other community colleges as well. What I'm really what I want to do is to kind of take this idea of there being a sort of a roadmap to higher education, challenge you to sort of change your perspective a little bit and to put yourself in the shoes of a student who's just kind of stepping down this process, thinking about where it is that they might go. Probably not a bad idea to think of that student as being a first-generation student. A lot of first-generation students who would be doing that. It's sort of cheating if you've done it before, right? So thinking in that way. And what I'd sort of like to do is to take you through a number of kind of thought processes, a number of problems and approaches that I'm sort of currently involved in to try to help move our system, to try to help institutions help students succeed, and along the way try to maybe give you a little bit of a set of toolkits, really ways in which maybe you can think differently or help you think about what you're doing right now. So this is the first beginning. So I'm a mathematician by trade. So if you told me, I don't know, half a dozen years ago that I'd get up in front of a bunch of people and talk about behavioral economics, I probably would have looked at you and said, well, what is behavioral economics? So if you're thinking, what is behavioral economics? Well, behavioral economics is really all about understanding that people don't make choices the way that you think that they make choices. You don't make choices the way that you think you make choices. And I don't make choices the way I think you make choices, even though I've read a lot of the stuff about behavioral economics. It's understanding the fact that the ways in which we, as humans, go about trying to make the decisions that we make all through our lives, they are rational, but not necessarily rational in the way that one might naturally expect. So how is it then that we can how is it that we can understand how it is that people make decisions, and then change the framework in which those decisions are made? That's what choice architecture is about. It's about trying to pose the choices that people make in a way that help them make choices that are better choices for them, not manipulating their choices, although if you've been to see a magic show, you know how this might work. Instead, trying to understand how it is that people can end up making decisions they really didn't intend to make because they didn't understand the consequences that were behind them. So what I want to do is to begin with an example. And the example really is, if we're going to take this kind of roadmap analogy, before you go somewhere, you've got to decide where to go. I wouldn't have gotten very far if I left Nashville and said, I'm just going to kind of wander around. I know some Petersburg's out somewhere. I'm just going to, I still feel lucky. I'm just going to kind of go. But you've got to decide where it is that you're going to go. So, fundamental question in higher education, does it matter if you decide? Does it matter if you decide on a discipline? Does it matter if you decide on a program? Does it matter if you have that decision made? Or is it okay to just kind of get in and wade in with both feet? Just kind of wing it, explore, wander about a bit. Does that matter? So let's go see. This is one of the nice things in the world today, that you don't have to just kind of philosophize and just kind of have a go and say, well, let me think about this for a long time. Instead, we can actually go and see, and actually run data and see. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit of a different kind of visualization for this. This is a new approach that I'm working with that tries to treat each individual student as an individual. So not in some kind of aggregated kind of fashion, or see on average this, that, or the other, but actually get some idea about what all of the students look like, not together as a picture, but as single individuals. So This right here is a diagram, visualization of all of the students in the Tennessee system. Back in fall 2010, they arrived at the universities, and about 4,500 of them didn't choose a major. They just came in as undecided. And in this visualization, we saw each one of those 4,500 students gradually work their way through the next 3 years. As they went up the diagram, they were amassing credit hours. Right? So the credit hours are up the y-axis. And each little dot, you can imagine, is a single student. And if we did it on my laptop, you could roll your mouse over it and you could see their face. So you can imagine every single individual. And the colors, as it happens in this diagram, convey some information, although you can imagine you could do this in all kinds of ways. The green means their GPA is at least 3, and red means their GPA is below 2, and yellow means it's somewhere in the middle. So let me do it again so you can see this. So now you can start seeing it. So here they are, and you can see every now and again some of them just disappear and turn into a little white dot. What do you think that means? Yeah, they drop out. The students in Tennessee drop out. I don't know if they do in Florida. Do they drop out in Florida? Yeah, students drop out. Really, that's what this is all about, trying to understand what is it that happens that makes somebody enroll and then they stop. And sometimes we know life just happens, right? I mean, that's the reality. Sometimes not. All right, well, so I told you that I wanted to see them decide. So let's see what happens when they decide. Because now what we're going to do is exactly the same visualization, but now when they decide, now they're all going to bunch to the right. It's not a political statement, it's just the reality of the diagram. So here's what happens. So this is the end of the first semester, now some of them have decided. Second semester, some more have decided. So you can see what's happening. We're working our way through that 3 years of data. Well, look at that. So we started off with about 4,500 students, right, 4,470. Over that 3-year period, fewer than half of them ever decided anything. I don't know about you, but I was sort of surprised, because I sort of thought in my head, well, they're all going to pick something in the end. Yeah, no. Actually, most of them don't, because most of them drop out before they ever do that. The vast majority on that left-hand side, left-hand side, they never decided, and they just dropped out. They're no longer studying anywhere. There are a few that are not in that situation. Right? You can see there's a small smattering of colored dots that are still on that left-hand side. Those are students who haven't yet decided, but who are still kind of in the game. But they're few and far between. Most of the students who didn't decide, and most of them did not decide, most of the students who didn't decide, they're no longer with us. On the contrast, those who did decide, there's some of them who decided and they decided poorly, or for whatever reason have dropped out. But the vast majority of them are still in the game. They're still studying. They're still with us. Does that make any sense? All right, so what do we do? So first of all, my question is, so does it matter if you decide? Yeah, it appears like it really does matter if you decide. Yeah? Can I make you decide? I can make you check a box. Is that the same as deciding? I don't know. I'm always worried about cause and effect, and you should know this about me. So I come from England by the sea, and so I know it to be the case that where there are more seagulls, people wear fewer clothes. Luckily, because I understand cause and effect, I know that if I strip off, we will not see a flock of seagulls flying to the window. That's not the way it works. Right? So I am not saying that magically deciding makes you a more successful student. But what I am saying is that not deciding puts you at risk. That's clear. The data is clearly saying that if we don't seriously take into account the fact that when students arrive at our campuses and they do not make a decision about a major, if we don't at that point turn around, I think once upon a time we used to say this. We used to say, well, at least we don't have to worry about them. Because, the reality is if they know their major, this stuff we have to do, right? If you know somebody's going to major in physics, well, you've got to go to the physics department, you've got to twin them up with an advisor, there's stuff we have to do. But if they haven't made a decision, well, that's cool. They'll make one day, and when they do, we'll deal with them then. Yeah, That's not the right way around. Apparently, the right way around is the fact that if somebody comes to your campus and says, look, I really have no idea what I want to do, I'm undecided, then they are voluntarily, of their own volition, saying, you need to watch me, because 50-50 whether I'll be around in a couple of years. That's very interesting. It's also the case that maybe there are ways in which we can help them to make a decision if we understand the decision that they're making. Because there are students who come to campuses and they really don't know what they want to do. I remember actually talking to a young man when I was at RCP, and I said, what do you think you'll major in? And he said, well, I'm going to major in music. And I said, well, that's fabulous. What do you play? And he looked at me and, I don't play anything. He said, okay, well, maybe you sing. Actually, I like to sing too. I'm not going to sing. Do you sing? No, I don't sing. I said, well, why do you want to major in music? He said, well, I really like listening to music. I said, so you think you want to major in listening to music? He said, yeah, can I do that? No, you can't do that. So it is clear that there are people who really don't know what they want to do. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who kind of know what they want to do. In fact, the vast majority of people, as we've studied this, they kind of know what they want to do. They just don't know exactly what they want to do. Right? So you arrive on a campus and you say, I think I want to study math or physics or engineering, something like that. Right? Well, if you think that, you're in good company. Probably Newton would have said that. Right? So I mean, it's not like it's an unreasonable thing to say. What did we say? Oh, you're undecided. I understand, yes. Well, when you've decided on one of those three, come and see me and we'll talk. No. It's clear that if you talk to most people, that they're able to distinguish the beach from the mountains. Right? The vast majority of people, if you say, do you know exactly what you want to study, they'll say, I have no idea. And then if you talk to them a little, then you realize that actually they have a pretty decent idea. They certainly have a pretty decent idea about a lot of things that they don't want to do. And after a while, probably a relatively short while, you're able to narrow down to at least some reasonable kind of area. This is what's happened in our system actually now. So we've adopted this concept of an academic focus. We've done it as a system. We've all adopted exactly this same set. If somebody knows exactly what they want to major in our system, well then go ahead and study it. But if they don't know, and they come in undecided, then that kicks off an intrusive kind of advising to sit down with that student and say, okay, look, at least let's distinguish the beach from the mountains. At least let's understand, in a broad sense, what kind of thing is the kind of thing that interests you. And notice these things overlap, and they do so deliberately. It isn't because I just couldn't fit them on the page. Right? It really is the case that, economics probably sits in at least 4 of these, and perfectly rightly. And there's lots of disciplines that sit in more than one, and all that's just fine, because we're not talking about rearranging people's collegiate structure, we're simply helping people to be able to make a decision. Now it's the case that rather than having to choose from one of 130 different programs, most of which I've never heard of, now I'm asking you to think of, can you at least narrow down to one of 8? You can do one of 8. There's a lot of behavioral economics that shows that you can make a decent choice between a number of things that's somewhere between about 6 and 9. Much more than 9, then you start kind of going back and depending on some other kinds of ways to make the decision easier. Much fewer than about 6, you feel like there really isn't a choice, like you're being kind of hemmed in. But somewhere between there, that's why we chose 8. Somewhere between there, you feel kind of good about this. It's also handy that it's a power of 2, because then you can do it in 3 questions if you want. By doing this, now it can be the case that students really can feel like they actually make a choice. So I can have a conversation with somebody and say, well, what do you think? I mean, how do you feel about math? Is math something that you feel kind of good about using, or is it not really? You don't see yourself kind of using. You don't see yourself using math on a regular basis. Okay, well, are you kind of more interested in business, or more interested in kind of more artistic kind of? Do you like artistic kind of things? Well, that's cool. This kind of art that you do you see yourself making physical kinds of objects, or is it more kind of more written kinds of work? So you're interested in humanities. Well, that's very interesting. Now, why don't you begin in a humanities focus, and then over this next semester, we'll design a curriculum pathway that you can study for the next semester. As it happens, that curriculum pathway will take you along any of the degrees that kind of might sit in that humanities focus. And over the semester, by the end of the semester, you'll be in a better position to be able to decide which of the humanities is the one that really interests you, what interests you down that road. Does that make sense? In fact, by doing the right kind of discrete optimization, as it happens, we can make all of those pathways all sort of mutually harmonious. So that students, if they begin down any of these pathways, if in the first 2 or 3 semesters they decide they'd like to flip over to any of the others, we can minimize the loss. There has to be, in the end, some kind of loss from not making a decision early. But you can start off in a STEM field and flip over to health sciences, or you can start off in arts and flip over to humanities or social sciences. We can make this work. But it can only work because we work at this from the level of knowing all of the programs and the structure of all of them and bringing all of that to bear. That's much more of a perspective than any human advisor. It's very, very difficult to know the structure of that many programs. But by using predictive analytics and data mining inside, we're able to create those curricular structures to be able to really optimize that. What we hope is that A, by designing the curricula in such a way that students feel like they are studying what they chose, that there's good evidence to show that when that happens, simply people are much more successful in what it is that they do. If nothing else, when they go home at Christmas time and tell Aunt Edna, and she says, "What are you doing over there in college?" they can say, "I have a humanities focus." And she'll like that. She'll like it much more than when they say undecided. I've never met anybody who proudly said, "I'm undecided." You don't see T-shirts. T-shirts being sold saying, "I'm an undecided student." Right? These things don't exist. This is an existential kind of issue, and one where people will be simply much more attached to the decision they make when they feel like a decision has been made. Does that make any sense? Let me kind of go along this road. So if they've now made a choice, what are ways in which we can help them to navigate along that pathway? So first of all, are there interstates? Are there interstates? Yeah. What do they look like? So here's an interesting sort of thought. This is actually all of the system-wide enrollments in the Tennessee Board of Regents. It's about 8,000 courses all told that we teach every semester. It's about 1 million headcount in all those classes. How many of them do you need to get more than half of the enrollment? So 8,000 all told. So how many classes do you need, not how many sections, but how many different subjects, how many different classes of those 8,000 do you need to get more than half of the enrollment, more than 500,000 students? See? 25 is a decent guess, actually. It's a little bit higher, it's 30. But 25 is exactly the right sort of guess. Now you know that there are 30, you can write them down, is my suspicion. Right? This is exactly the same at your institution. It's true across the system. It's true at any institution. They won't be exactly the same, but you see, you get this very, very significant kind of concentration that most students are enrolled in a very small number of classes. Now, here's my question. How well do they do? How well do they do in this small number of classes? So in our system anyway, the blue classes, system-wide, we have a success rate below 2/3. The red classes, we have a system-wide success rate above 2/3. Nothing magic about 2/3 other than it's a happy fraction that's somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4. So what do you do about it? Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. about it. The first thing I'm doing is celebrating the fact there's 30 and not 3,000. The second thing I'm doing is realizing that because there's 30 and not 3,000, now you can actually do something about it. Because in reality, these classes, so this is I'm a graph theorist by trade, this is kind of the way my mind thinks. This is a transcript analysis of all of the graduates from the Tennessee Board of Regents over the last decade. What we did was took all the courses on their transcript, and courses that were on a transcript together with another course, and we put an edge between them. So in other words, courses that are on students' transcripts, on lots of graduates' transcripts, then they have lots of edges, and they appear big in this diagram. Classes which are on very few graduates' transcripts, because they're much further down the curricular food chain, well, they have fewer edges, they're smaller on this diagram. What turns out to be the case is that this curricular structure, well, it's a small world graph. There are particular courses, the same courses again, same kinds of courses, that are right at the heart curricularly. They're foundational to the learning of any kind of discipline. Turns out to be the case that exactly these same kinds of courses, when students earn good grades in their courses, they increase the likelihood that they will graduate. When they earn poor grades, they decrease the likelihood that they will graduate. So somehow these courses, they carry a massively disproportionate kind of effect in a curricular learning kind of sense. So what are we going to do about it? On our system, we now have a redesign initiative, which I kicked off back in the fall, asked teams of faculty. And this was already a kind of an interesting concept, that there would be teams of faculty, not individual faculty. I actually had people who asked me, now, how many people have to be on this team? And I said, well, it's a team, so I'm actually looking for, the ideal if there were 3 or 4. Can I do it on my own? No, you cannot do it on your own. It has to be a team. Okay. So teams of faculty who would step forward from their institution and would say, we want to rethink the way in which we're going to approach one of these top 30 classes. How is it that we're going to help more of our students learn more stuff at a deeper level to have a deeper and more successful understanding of this material? The fact that there's only 30 means that the 56 redesigns which will happen this fall, already it'll be the case that this initiative will touch thousands of students across our system. Next year, the most successful then will be scaled up across all of the sections of that institution. So in short order, by going after these particular classes, we will influence the learning of basically every student in the system. I'm recognizing the fact that we don't have to redesign every course in the system. Initially, we only have to go after the ones that are the most influential. Of course, it's the case. And as time goes on, these kinds of techniques will gradually influence all of the learning across the system. But we don't have to begin over there. We want to begin in the heart. Does that make any sense? Again, this is not just simply because, because there's a high enrollment, a lot of people have failed in that class. There's a much deeper and more profound idea happening here. But it isn't the case that we're just worrying about more people passing this class. Success in these classes, it infects the rest of the curriculum with success. Failure in these classes infects the rest of the system with failure. And in fact, what we can see from similar kinds of analysis is that actually sometimes it isn't just a D or an F. Sometimes a C is kind of it's a failure waiting to happen. Sometimes a B is a failure waiting to happen. It just depends on the course, and it depends on the major that this student is studying. Understanding that early allows us to be able to intervene and step in and do something about it. Does that make any sense? Let me hone in on one particular road, if you like. It is the case, I think, that a lot of higher education is a product of history. Not history of the discipline, but just the fact that what we have now is things that have been passed on to us earlier. To what degree is it the case that the courses that people study in your programs, to what degree is that the product of just what we've always done? And to what degree is it a product of us really making our business to know yeah, these are the courses they need to be taking. This is the material which really leads to their success. So I want to show you a particular example. So this is the same game. It's an analysis of all of the system-wide enrollments in math. Of course, there aren't 8,000 math classes. There's many fewer. I won't ask the question, but you get the same kind of idea. Of course, you get the same kind of concentration. Actually, you only need 4 or 5 to get more than half of the system-wide enrollment. And it turns out that statistics is by far the major winner. Right, so you can see there's something close to 20,000 students who are taking statistics. What's interesting is that actually that isn't quite right. Here's why. If you collect together all of the things that are kind of basically college algebra, because you've got college algebra, you've got pre-calculus, you've got trig, you've got all of these things that are basically college algebra. If you add all those together, then college algebra ends up being the big winner. Right? Probably is true here in Florida as well. So here's my question: why? Why? Now, I mean, I know the name is suggestive, right? It's college algebra. Right? So pre-calculus is also suggestive. Right? In fact, when you think about these courses, they were both designed for the same purpose. They were designed to give students the skills to be able to pass calculus. College algebra, if it isn't for that purpose, is really not college algebra, it's really parental algebra. The next time you'll use it is when your child does algebra 2. That's exactly what happened. So I'm a mathematician, so this is sort of an inside story, but it really is the case that if you talk to mathematicians, they will tell you the same, that the college algebra is designed to give people the algebraic skills to do the manipulation you need to do calculus. That's what it's for. So why is it the case that roughly 24,000 students in the Tennessee Board of Regents system are taking courses to prepare them to take calculus, when actually every semester about 5,000 students are doing calculus? And in fact, when you look at those students who do the college algebra and pre-cal, almost none of them go on to do calculus. Most of them just stop. It's the only math class they ever take. Now, there's nothing wrong with algebra. Algebra, some of my best friends do algebra. But the reality is that if the only reason why students are taking algebra is because we're saying, you should take algebra, and they say, why? You say, well, it's college algebra. Then we're doing them a massive disservice. I actually used to, when I was a department chair at Ole Miss, I actually asked people, I went around and asked advisors in other departments, why are you advising students to do college algebra? You know what they said? Well, I did college algebra. I said, well, did it serve you well? I said, no, I never used it, but I mean, I did it, so I figured everybody else should do it too. That's what should happen. What I'm saying here is not that students should not do college algebra. What I'm saying is that we should pay attention to the fact that people should take courses that have curricular relevance. We shouldn't simply be telling people to do courses because it's the first course that you think of, or because it's the one that you told the last 100 people you've advised. Instead, we should be thinking about which courses actually have some kind of curricular pertinence, and that's what we should be telling people to do. Almost surely it's the case, in almost any discipline, other than a calculus-based discipline, that statistics would be a better fit. Either statistics or quantitative, or some kind of quantitative reasoning. And yet it is the case that overwhelmingly across most of the nation, college algebra is by far the most prevalent math class. Not because most disciplines require any kind of algebra. It's a terminal class. And there it stops. So if it is the case then that really often in advising we're kind of caught in a rut, what's a way out of that? What is, if you like, a data-informed, what does that look like if you bring data into advising? So that's kind of the next thing to think about. To think about how do you individualize the advice, individualize the information structure for students to be able to make wise choices about their degree program? How do you help them to navigate their way through their degree program? The first thing to think about is that it's really hard. It is really hard, I think, to navigate your way through a degree program. I don't know if you've done this recently, but if you've not done it, I challenge you to do it. Go and pick a discipline that's not your own, go back to your place, go and look on the web and see if you can make a degree plan that fits all the different degree criteria and where you can take the classes when they're offered and in the right kind of sequence and all of that. It's really not very easy. So if it's not easy for us and it's our business, how easy is it for a student who's a first-generation student, say, who has no idea about the core requirements and the major requirements and all of those kinds of things? So to trivialize this and imagine that this really doesn't play much of a part, we're really missing the boat. It does. It makes a massive difference. What's more, though, is that as advisors, and I was an advisor for a long, long time too, we also didn't really ever have the information structure to be able to provide the advice we wanted to give. In my own discipline, I think I could do a pretty decent job. I know mathematics pretty well. But if you say to me, well, look, I also have to take 9 hours of social science, what do you think I should do there? I'm like, I don't know. What are your friends taking? I mean, do you know anybody over there? No, look, you've got a gap there at 7, at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, let's go and see what's available then. You can take that. This is not the way to construct a higher education curriculum. Right? Instead, we should be about learning. So how would we do this? So as has been mentioned, I thought about this a few years ago, and this is really the idea of creating this system, Degree Compass. It's sort of Netflix, Amazon, Pandora meets academic advising. That's really what it is. But in the sense of saying, I want to create a tool which empowers the decisions you make, not make the decision for you. These things are not the same. This is not a system which automates decision making. It doesn't simply enroll you into things. Instead, it empowers the decisions that you will then make. It nuances the conversation that you would have with an advisor or that you would have with a student. So that now the conversation that you're having is about the pros and cons of plausible options, as opposed to somehow imagining that all possibilities are equally valid. They're not. It's simply not the case, that just because this student needs to take this one class from all these 7, that any of those 7 would do. It isn't the case. So, how would that look? Well, so this is the way the interface looks, and I think it's now well known this product has been acquired by Desire to Learn, or D2L now, as I have to say. But so the first piece is that this thing needs to be anywhere they want it to be, somewhere where it's easy to find, somewhere it's easy to access. And you can see the idea that it's going to present for the student, and in each unmet degree requirement, what are the different options that would be open to them. And it provides star ratings. And the star ratings convey, well, how strongly am I going to suggest this class to this student? So what kind of things would go into such a thing? Well, first of all, you've got to decide what data you're going to use. What kind of data do you actually have laying around? Are you going to use demographic data? We chose not. We deliberately chose not to use demographic data because we wanted to undo existing biases that we thought existed in demographic higher education. Right? There's an achievement gap, a 20% achievement gap for underrepresented minority students and for low-income students. You can make any kind of impact on that. Using demographic data as part of the predictions is never going to do that. So we chose not to do that. It is the case, almost surely, the predictions will be slightly more accurate if we put them in the short term. So what might play out? So let's do this. Right, so the first thing we want to do is to interface with the degree audit system, find all the classes the student might feasibly take. Already it's the case that this is more than I ever did as an advisor. I never went through the bulletin and found out all the possible classes the student could possibly take. I only ended up ever advising courses that I'd ever heard of. You probably did too. Right? Very difficult to suggest something when you don't even know it's there. Now you have all these classes. Well, you've got to prioritize them in some kind of a way. Well, the first priority is, let's think about which courses are at the curricular center of the institution's overall curriculum. This is something I couldn't possibly ever do as a human. Think about which classes, the classes which not only count towards this degree, but count towards as many other possible degrees as possible. That way, if the student changes their major, almost certainly this course will still count. And what's more, this course then has some kind of significant curricular emphasis in a lot of different directions. Of course, we're talking about various different stages in the student's learning, and at various different places in their program, those things will have different roles. But overall, we'd like to know, in a generalized curricular sense, what's the thing that's the most foundational for their learning right now? So we're not going to suggest for them to take their math class in the spring of their senior year. Right? Not a good idea. Secondly, everything I just said is true in their major too. Right? So one of the courses which in their particular major are at the heart of their learning right now. What's the material that's the next kind of thing to learn? So you're really familiar with this. It's what we normally describe as a prerequisite tree. But the reality is that in everybody's program, there are courses which are sort of, understood prerequisites. Right? Provided you know. The question is whether you're in the know to know. So this data, it goes to see. Maybe there is a course which is really a prerequisite which you didn't even realize was really there. So this is going to fish that out. The third sense in which we're going to sequence this is to understand that courses have a sell-by date. That it matters when you take particular courses. It matters which order you take them in, and it matters that they happen in subsequent semesters, not just in an order. So it matters that you take Cal 2 after Cal 1, and it matters that you take Cal 2 in the semester after Cal 1, not with some like indeterminate gap between the two of them. Right? Same will be true for so many classes. So far, if we pull those things together, what we've done is created an individualized, sort of nuanced sequence of classes, the classes which are the next kinds of things to think about. The last piece is to actually use some analytics to predict how well the student would do if they were to take each of these classes. Create a grade prediction engine that predicts the student's grade, and that way we would be able to steer students towards not only the classes that have a good curricular fit, but in which they have the best likelihood of success. That would be the last piece. Now you might be a little skeptical as to whether or not you can predict grades like that. It turns out that you can. I mean, I was a little skeptical too when we first went down this road. But it turns out to be the case that the grade prediction engine successfully predicts grades within about half a letter grade on average. With a very good likelihood, it's able to distinguish whether a student, for instance, will pass the class or fail the class, get a D or an F, or get an A, B, or a C. And we've now seen this not only at Austin Peay State University, but across a number of different institutions, everything from Research 1 schools to community college. So, yeah, you can predict grades. You can predict grades very accurately only using academic data, only using the grades that are sitting on the student's transcript together with their standardized test scores and their high school grades. This is what you need. All right, so let's mix it all together. 5-star class. 5-star class does not mean they'll get an A. And this is a deliberate piece of behavioral economics. 5-star class. 5 stars is 5 stars for this student. 5 stars conveys for this student, this is your best fit. What does that mean? It means it's curricularly the best fit. It's a course which is the next kind of course for you to take. It's foundational to your major, it's foundational to the overall learning of this institution, and what's more, it's a class in which you are forecast to make as good a grade in that class as you are in any other class that you might take right now, for whatever kinds of grades you get. That's a 5-star class for you. And I think as an advisor, that's exactly the kind of class that I would have aspired to put my students into. I'd like to find a class which has good curricular relevance and in which I feel like they would actually be successful. That's a 5-star class. All right, so does it work? So here's the kind of data that we're getting. Because to some degree, the things that I showed you at the front, these are brand new. The things we've just started down the road of, they sound like nice ideas, and at least you can see there's a rationale behind them. Here now, this has been going for 2 or 3 years, and so we can start to see, does changing the decision matrix for students, does changing and empowering the decisions they make, does it actually make a difference? Or are they doing okay anyway? Well, what we already saw was that by introducing this system, we shifted the grade distribution. The more students were doing better in their classes. A larger proportion of students were getting A, B's, and C's than did before. A shift of more than 5 standard deviations for campus-wide, and more than 7 for Pell students. And actually it was almost 3 for African-American students. Now remember, there's no way in the system for the faculty member to know which students are looking and choosing these courses based on this. And there isn't like these students walk in class with a big sort of degree compass sign on their head saying, yep, I'm one of those students that chose this class because of that. That's not the way it works. Students are simply taking classes, but now they're selecting classes in which there is a greater likelihood of their success. And look at that. We see larger proportions of them succeeding. This is good. Let's delve into this a little bit more. So do they actually do better? So here's some data in the university setting, and this is 2 or 3 universities in Tennessee kind of pooled together. You can see that when students take a class where it's at least a 4-star class for them, well, 64% of them make an A. In general, only about 35% of the students make an A across the institutions. So yeah, when they go into classes which they are forecast to do better, they do significantly better. They're much more likely to get an A. They're much, much more likely to get either an A or a B. And yeah, they're massively more likely to pass the class. And you can see that this is basically the same. That's why what I wanted to show you there. So it's basically the same no matter the level of the class. And this is a little bit surprising. I expected it to be the case that when students took classes that were kind of further up the food chain. 1,000 level class. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious. Does it ever happen that the lower level students never get hit with a 4-star to take a particular class? You just have larger groupings of better performing students, so therefore you're having higher pass rates?
No, that's a great question. Actually, over the time, the sort of demographics of the incoming population really didn't change at all.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a fabulous question. This is not an exercise in sort of in demographic engineering. It's about helping. I didn't talk about the demographics of Austin P, but about 60% of the students are Pell eligible, more than 50% first generation, very significant military population. More than half of the students are adult students over the age of 25. So it's a population which is probably very familiar for many of the people in the room. Yeah. Same kind of thing is true in the community college setting. You can see, again, it doesn't really matter whether we're predicting grades in a developmental setting or in a 1,000-level class. Same kinds of things. Let's disaggregate a little bit. This is a chart to show what happens when students are following more or less of the technology's advice as part of their coursework. So these are all students who are taking 4 classes, 12 hours. Now, I'm not recommending that students take 12 hours. Actually, I have some very compelling data on that case. But the reality is that, at least in Tennessee, an overwhelming majority of students who are full-time students take 12 hours. So there's a lot of data in there. So I wanted to see what that played out. This is disaggregated so that the students on the left, none of the classes they're taking are classes that would have been recommended. Students on the right, all of the classes that they're taking are classes that would have been recommended. So you can see that there's this it's sobering to think about cause and effect, but it really does appear to be the case that the more classes that are recommended, the better students do. And students graduate from institutions because they earn credits, not because they attempt them, because they earn them. The last thing I want to show on this line is what happens when we disaggregate based on race and on low-income students. I mentioned this achievement gap. And this is a national phenomenon. It's true here, it's true throughout the nation. So when you look in general, we see that there's an achievement gap. There's about a 2 credit hour difference in the average number of earned hours for underrepresented minority students. But when you only look at students, all of whom are taking classes that are recommended by technology, that their decisions are being empowered by technology, everybody does better, but the gap shrinks by a factor of 2. This, if nothing else, for me this is, I think, the thing which I feel the best about trying to put this technology in place. There's not that many things that we found that have actually been able to close that achievement gap. This is one, and it is one. And it's true, it's interesting. Well, there you go. It's really stuck. I've never seen that. No, it's completely frozen. There you go. If someone could see if they could unfreeze it, I'll just kind of fill in time. So when it comes to empowering the decision that students make, it's very clear that using technology to empower advising, there's tremendous benefit which could be gotten out of this. So far, I hope it's the case that we've explored this idea of it's important that students make informed choices. It's important that they make those choices. It's important that we empower those choices. And that's the last point that I kind of really want to make here. That it really is the case that now we know that it matters the courses that students choose. It is no longer the case that we can accept students enrolling in classes because that's what's left over. It is no longer the case that we can accept this. It is now a call to action to say that we must do what needs to be done, the predictive work that needs to be done to anticipate future demand, to anticipate the courses that are needed for students in an upcoming semester, and then make it our business that we're able to deliver those courses in times and in formats that allow them to be able to take them. That's why organizations like this collaborative that you created, is one of the reasons why it's so important, because it really is the case that in an online format we have as much possibility as access as we ever would. But to simply content ourselves to that, I think it's still not enough. We need to make it our business to know what are the classes that students need to take, and then be able to deliver those to make sure that we really have the ability to have that capacity. So I talk about this a lot. It's often the case. I'll ask people, now, during your course of study, did you ever come across a situation where the course you needed wasn't offered or it was full? It's generally the case. About half the room was so handled. This is a general phenomenon. So I think it's the case that once upon a time we can forgive ourselves from that and say, well, you take it now, you take it next semester, it's okay. No. All of the data is now excellent. It's very clear that it's not okay. The longer that it takes, the less likely it is that someone will graduate. And more than likely, by putting that roadblock in, you really do empower and endanger. If it's the case that we really are serious about having a more educated society, that's the bottom line. It's now our business to make sure that we can make it happen. So, thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if there's time for that.
Yeah, we'll do a couple of minutes of questions, and then we'll break out into the small groups. Okay. Any other questions?
Tristan, you did the analysis of the 30.
Yeah.
Were there any courses in that list that surprised you?
Actually, no.
Pretty much what you expected.
It's pretty much what I expected. I mean, actually, to be honest with you, I've done it before. I've done it on an institutional setting, and so I hoped that this would be true in a system-wide setting. But once you know this phenomenon is true, you can write it down.
Most of the Gen Ed core kind of courses.
It's exactly what it is.
Courses, gateway courses, as we call them.
That's exactly what it is. The thing that actually surprised me was the blue and red bars. I really actually thought that system-wide that it would be better. And, well, gives us something to do anyway.
with this knowledge that you have now, has there been a change in the behavior on campuses of both courses being offered or requirements within the curriculum? I work with curriculum a lot, so it's really fascinating. But is there a change in behavior?
So yes, and it's increasing. So you can imagine when I was on campus, when I was provost, this created some interesting conversations. I would call department chairs. When I first began this work, I called department chairs and I said, well, look at that. We've done this sequencing analysis, and we see that you have 20 students who need to take this class in the fall. And they said, well, that's very interesting, but we offer that class in the spring. And I said, well, that's very interesting. I'm interested that you, up until now, have offered it in the spring, but I'm interested in what we need to do to make you offer it this fall, because you have 20 students who need it. And so, let's say often as a provost you find a way to work out a deal. Sometimes it means you're saying, I'm making you an offer you can't refuse. And sometimes it's a recognition that you really do actually need more significant resources to make this happen. But we were able to get those things done. What was actually quite interesting was in iteration 2, I not only told them that there were 20 students, I told them the students' names. That changed things a lot. That when department chairs not only said it wasn't in the abstract anymore, right? Now they knew who these people were, and now I listed them up, and they knew I was right because they knew those students and they knew exactly where they were. Then they really did make it happen, but it was a give and take because it really was. I mean, and I told them, look, I'm giving you a stick to beat me with. If I'm asking you to make it happen, well then as provost, what I have to do is to say, sorry, the provost in the room, but this is still the inside deal. If I'm saying I want you to make this happen, then you have to say to me, well, okay, then let's work together to make the resources happen, because I only have this many people. But there's a caveat to that. It was also the case that sometimes the conversation said, well, now I have to go and talk to Dr. So-and-so, and he always looks forward to teaching this class. I know there's only 3 people in there, but I mean, all year he looks forward to teaching that class. And I said, well, sorry, he's going to have to wait, because there's 30 people who need this class, and there's 3 over there. Yeah, let's see if we can do the math. Yeah. So.
What about the psychological impacts of showing a student that there is a 5-star class for them? Does that play a role in their success in the class?
I think it does. So there's something very strategic about this and was very carefully thought. And actually we had lots of conversations with students in the development of the interface. So the first thing is we don't surface to the student the predicted grade. So the students see this overall holistic rating of whether this is a good course for them to go and take, but we don't show them the predicted grade. And actually we asked students and they said they didn't want to see the predicted grade, which was good because we didn't want to show them the predicted grade. Now, I've actually had faculty ask me whether or not we could have an interface which just fed the predicted grade into the gradebook. I guess it's possible. I said it's an institutional decision as to whether or not you want to make that happen. The other thing was, so for instance, initially, we just simply had a very long list of all the classes that the student could feasibly take. And that didn't work well. It freaked them out. A direct quote is, that freaks me out. Because they said, do I have to take all of these? Well, no. But already the fact that you list all these classes and there's such a sort of lack of understanding of the way that all this plays out. It's easy on the back end, but on the front end not so much. So yeah, the construction of that interface, so it doesn't restrict or decide for you. It empowers the choices you're making. And now you have a decision structure. Now you've got a class, maybe biology is 5 stars and chemistry is 4.5 stars. You've always really loved chemistry. Okay, go ahead and take chemistry. Nobody's making you take the other one, but now you know what it is that's going on. And actually, the reverse is true, that if you aspire to be a nurse and anatomy and physiology has like 2 stars, okay, let's talk about it. There's a reason for that, and the reason for it is that your forecast is just format. Okay, well now, what are we going to do about that? I'm not saying you can't be a nurse, but what I'm saying is that for you to be a nurse, we need to work together to make this happen. And that's part of that advising structure. Yeah.
So, I think no, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit more about that. I'm curious about the curricular fit of specific courses. We're going through this exact exercise right now at Safety College, and the questions are there specific questions that the student responds to help gather, I guess, their perspective on the curricular fit? So if they're presented with, say, a list of 10 courses that might satisfy a humanities requirement, do they, in addition to some of their past performance, are they also asked to answer or respond to some other questions to help narrow those options for them?
Actually, not as part of this interface, but this is so I freely admit this is a beginning. That there are perhaps other things which might at some point you might want to make as part of the decision matrix, but they're not like that. The student sees the courses which are offered, and they can actually click on those courses and get course descriptions. They can get times. They can see who's teaching them, all that kind of information. So they can actually find out a lot about the course, but now in a more focused kind of way to see. Okay, these are 2 or 3 courses which probably I should be thinking about. Okay, now let me talk. Let me talk to my friends. Not like friends don't know stuff. Let me talk to my friends. Let me dig in and find out what it is that's going on about this course. Actually, what we began to develop was a set of actually course materials for people who are trying to find out about that course. Because let's face it, the description in the bulletin is not really written for students. Right? It's written for registrars. Or it's written for us. Right? Most of the time, the course description in the bulletin contains technical terms that you find out what they are when you take the class. So really the course description doesn't help in that sense. So understanding that those materials are useful was already an eye-opener. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. Is that all right? Well, one's a bit more conceptual. It might just be the fact that I didn't take pre-calc when I was in college. But the first one the conceptual one has to do with how your model, the 5-star model, how does it take into account classes that have lower grades across the board? So historically, like A&P is a tough class, so maybe there's a 30% pass rate. And then maybe ethics is an easy class, and so there's a 90% pass rate. Wouldn't it have more stars for everybody, ethics, and wouldn't A&P have fewer stars for everybody? So I was just wondering how you account for that in your model.
No, it's a really good question. Okay. And actually, it gets to some sophistication that's sitting behind the modeling itself. What's also happening in reality is that we're not actually looking at the grades in abstracts, we're actually looking at the grades in comparison with one another. And so that also plays a part. We don't actually really, as it happens, we can predict grades relatively accurately, but it's also the case that what we really need to be able to do is to predict grades in comparison with one another, if I'm trying to lead you towards the classes in which you will do the best. You're right, some classes are significantly tough, other classes are less tough, at least in the sense of grade distributions. Well, what actually has turned out to be quite interesting in this is that it apparently is the case that a grade is actually a social construct in different disciplines. It isn't really the case, actually, that grades are sort of, they're not an equal display of similar sets of learning standard. And this is just the reality that sits out there. So part of the navigation of a system like this is then to try to create a more equitable playing field. But it's also the case that if I have a choice between taking anatomy and physiology and astronomy, and it happens to be the case that either one of them would fit my degree requirements, I'd sort of like to know, actually, which one I'm significantly more likely to earn a good grade. That may actually be useful information. And so, on its face, it may actually be very important for me to know which one of those two things is actually where I'm going to see more significant results.